Namaste everyone. Thank you for joining in this video. So today I'll be touching upon a topic upon regarding which there is a lot of fear and there is a lot of misconception. And that topic is the eighth house. Okay. So the eighth house is the house of mysteries. It is the most mystical house in the horoscope. But because of fear and because of ignorance and also because of a lot of misinformation propagated by a lot of people, a lot of confusion is also attributed to the eighth house. But nevertheless, even confusion is one of the themes of the eighth house. But then before we go to the meat of the topic, kindly subscribe to the channel, like the content, and do share with your friends and family if you find it useful. Now, there are different attributes that are associated with the eighth house of the horoscope. It is the house of reincarnation. It is the house that is responsible for sex, taboos, prohibitions, your extramarital affairs, your other affairs, other people's money, death, and even rebirth. It is also used to see inheritances, both material as well as spiritual. And also, the eighth house controls the health of the person to a lot of extent. Okay. And since the eighth is the second from the seventh house, so that house is also seen for the resources of the spouse. Okay. And as I said, the eighth house is known as the house of death. So it can sometimes mean your literal physical death, but more important, or, in a real sense, it reflects how you are changing as a person. Okay. If you look at it, you die every day, and once you wake up, you are reborn as a new person. Okay. So the eighth house actually shows the biggest changes that occur in a person's life, and that is the reason it is so very traumatic. Okay. It's so very fearful because change is always perceived to be difficult, and the responsibility for bringing about the change is given to the karaka of the eighth house, which is of course Saturn. Okay. And if you have any unresolved issues in early childhood, such as relationships with your father or mother, or any needs that were not fulfilled in childhood, that is what the eighth house will bring to the surface when you run the dasha of the eighth lord, or if a planet is transiting the eighth house. For example, if your ascendant lord is transiting the eighth house, then these issues will become very prominent in your life. And how these problems will arise? These problems will arise through your relationships, because as I said, by Bhavad Bhavam, the eighth house is the second to the seventh house. And although problems may arise, they will give you the opportunity to work through them. That will eventually lead to the transformation of the soul, its purification, and also correction of difficult karma. Okay. Now, the eighth house is also responsible for sex as a mystical experience in all its forms. But when sex is, used as an occasional tool for entertainment, then it becomes a difficult proposition. Okay. So you have to, if you want the eighth house to give you good results, you need to form a conscious connection between you and your spouse, or between you and the person you are having sex with, and then sex becomes something magical. Okay. And the eighth house governs just that. Sex becomes an instrument for entering the higher realms, a source of extremely powerful energy that can be later used to empower yourself. And of course, if you delve deeper into tantric sex is a symbolic act, a symbolic act that, when experienced in love, respect, and the mixing of souls, can lead to even more energy and vitality. But anyways, that is not the topic of this video. Okay. If you look at Parashara, the eighth house of the Vedic astrology is called as Mrityu Bhava. Okay. The house of death. And as such, the eighth house becomes a sort of a vault containing secrets of life and existence. And the eighth house rules over death in all its forms. Okay. And it is, as I said, it is not correct to speak only of physical death, because when we are considering the eighth house, it mostly refers to symbolic death and endings, because new beginnings can happen only after endings. However, as I said, it can also indicate how the person will die or the experiences associated with death. Now, the eighth house of your horoscope will directly affect the duration of life as well as the nature of death. And depending on the planet that is sitting in the eighth house, this may be a natural and peaceful end of life in old age or death caused by an accident or some chronic illness. So, the signs and the planets in the eighth house will show if you can marry someone rich or maybe get an inheritance, or if you will have financial problems. The Lord of the eighth house or the planets in the eighth house are reflected. It can affect your longevity in a negative way, causing chronic illness, unhappiness, as well as lack of peace of mind. So, how do different planets behave in the eighth house? Let's have a look from Sun to Saturn. If the Sun comes to the eighth house, then such people would be very interested in discovering the meanings of life, constantly looking for answers about everything that life represents, because the Sun throws its light on the eighth house, and these interests can draw them to the occult. And such people can acquire a great deal of knowledge on those matters. And these people may have many spiritual experiences that deeply transform them forever. Okay. And a very curious case is associated with the Sun in the eighth house. These people do achieve fame and success after their death. Okay. And such an arrangement is usually seen in writers and artists whose work become more recognizable after they leave the body. Again, if Sun is in the eighth house, it is also responsible from getting you other people's money from a financial point of view. And such people will often have a large inheritance. And usually, if Sun is not afflicted, they will handle that inheritance very wisely and try to increase it by their own efforts. Okay. The Moon in the eighth house, Moon becomes Marankaran Sthana, because the eighth house is the house of uncertainty, and the mind is something that desires certainty. Okay. So the placement of Moon in the eighth house will make curiosity a very important character trait, and such a person will be interested in everything unknown. Okay. And the presence of Moon in water signs speaks of pronounced extrasensory abilities. Okay. Such an arrangement of the Moon and its feminine energy shows or speaks about a large number of sexual partners. Okay. Now, that does not mean random relationships. It could also mean multiple marriages. And usually the person will seek a emotional intimacy and will harbor deep feelings for the partner. Okay. So this can also indicate a large number of romantic relationships. And if the Moon is joining a planet like Saturn or a planet like Mercury, then it can indicate a possible inheritance through a female source or a female relative, or even, from the mother. Mercury in the eighth house is excellent for money management. Okay. Such a person also has the ability to understand mysteries by using an infallible logic. It also allows such a person to unravel the secrets of creation. Okay. The gift is that these people are able to see individual fragments and throw them into a logical overall picture. Such people are very well suited for professions of a detective, a police officer, or undercover agent. And they have a great eye for details, and your brain often filters out important information and connections between evidence, even if they are not visible to the normal eye. Now, people having Mercury in the eighth house, they love to reveal other people's secret, and they are good at hiding their own. Okay. And on the flip side, as a negative trait, they can lie easily to others while keeping their thoughts private. Okay. Mercury, of course, we know is the planet of speech. And when placed in the eighth house, it can make the person like or have an affinity towards dark humor or dark comedy, which may not be acceptable to other people. And it represents the type of people who, who take, if they see something very fascinating, say for example, they see animal skull, they'll take it in their hands and say, to be or not to be, that is the question. Okay. And do not see any, you should not, if you come across such a person having Mercury in the 8th house, do not see anything reprehensible for them, in them, for this behavior, because for them it could just be a funny joke. Okay. Jupiter in the 8th house is, you know, is a planet, is a placement of benevolence. Okay. Because such a person can benefit from everything related to the house of death, including inheritance, including sex, including uncertainty. They find discomfort in uncertainty. Okay. And Jupiter, as we know, is the most benevolent planet. And usually such a natal position brings a large inheritance which can pass to the native without problems. Okay. The 8th house also governs the money of the spouse, and this placement definitely indicates a wealthy spouse. And such a person will show great interest in matters of life after death and also the occult. And the spiritual development never stops. Okay. Such a person acquires the status of a wise keeper of secrets in the eyes of other people. All right. And Jupiter usually gives long life and a natural easy death towards the end of a person's journey on this plane. Okay. However, on the flip side, these people can be very selfish. Okay. They will put themselves first in every situation, no matter whatever the circumstances are. I'm really sorry, I forgot Mars in after Moon. So Mars in the 8th house can lead to quarrels and disagreements in the field of finances. Okay. It is also a severe case of Mangal dosha, and the person has to be really careful with vehicles. Okay. Such a person may be fighting for an inheritance or may have trouble sharing property or financial gains with other people. And problems may also arise in his or her family life, because Mars in the 8th house usually indicates a marriage partner who will have financial losses after marriage. Now, if this Mars gets afflicted by Saturn, then such a person may be subjected to, to sexual abuse or other forms of physical abuse that indicates violence. And sometimes these people will use sex as a way to release energy and recharge at the same time. And these people usually have a very jealous nature about themselves and will do everything possible to get the person they have an affinity for. Venus, again, is the planet of healing. Okay. And it is the planet of feminine beauty and love. And it brings many positive aspects to the 8th house when it is placed there. So it can also indicate a wealthy spouse or inheritance. And such people are always quite emotional and sometimes jealous in a relationship. And for these people, sex is not just a physical activity, it is an element of art, a dance of two opposites that creates a love relationship between souls and destroys the boundaries of the ego. Now, other people can find them sexually attractive, but then cannot explain the reason for this phenomenon. It often happens with all of us. All of a sudden you may come across a person, maybe a friend or a colleague or anyone, who is very attractive sexually, and you cannot decipher the reason why this is happening. Okay. Now, Venus in the 8th house also indicates a pleasant end to life in the circle of relatives or friends, giving them the last minutes of their lives. What about Saturn? So the 8th house is usually a good place for the usually hostile Saturn because it indicates a good longevity, but it can indicate a lot of body pain after your 50s. Okay. And because of the nature of Saturn, the person will take the matters of the 8th house very seriously. There is always a risk that he or she will inherit debts or problems in processing and receiving an inheritance. And what is also possible are financial losses due to the spouse, because I've seen people, they usually have to pay the debts of their spouse whenever they have Saturn in the 8th house. Now, Saturn is not all negative as is commonly perceived. There are a few, positive sides to it as well. As I said, Saturn, it gives a very long life to the person, because Saturn is then simply blocking death and does not allow it to come to you. But apart from that, over a long life, such a native will not only have time to pay off all the debts, but will also gain some financial success. Okay. Usually for these people, death happens in old age and will always have a natural cause attributed to it. What about Rahu in the 8th house? Rahu is the planet of uncertainty. And when it comes to the 8th house, it actually starts giving positive results. Okay. Because the 8th house also is the house of uncertainty. So two negatives coming together actually indicates a positive outcome. But then Rahu in the 8th house, I've seen a lot of people getting fire burns or fire related accidents. So if you have Rahu in the 8th house, be very careful while driving a car. Be very careful while while working in the kitchen, because it can give you burn injuries that can take a lot of time to heal. Okay, you can take a lot of time to recover from those burns given by Rahu in the 8th. Again, Rahu in the 8th house also indicates some kind of mental depression, some kind of mental problem, because if life becomes too uncertain, then such a person finds it very difficult to take the mental trauma that comes with that uncertainty. Rahu in the 8th house also gives a lot of debt. It can indicate a person who borrows money for satiating his or her own whims. For example, we see these people who take a huge loan and they blow it all off on a marriage ceremony, on a lavish marriage ceremony, or on an expensive vacation. So that is Rahu in the 8th. Now, if you want to look at Rahu in the 8th, you just wait for my video series where I'm covering Rahu and Ketu in all the houses. There I can give you a very detailed idea about Rahu in the 8th as well as Ketu in the 8th. Okay. Now coming to Ketu in the 8th. So Ketu is the natural Chitrakaraka. It is the sharpest planet. And when Ketu comes to the 8th house, it can indicate surgeries. Okay, surgeries to the sexual organ. It can also indicate a native who gets cuts and burns very easily. Ketu in the 8th house is also responsible for causing sudden accidents, sudden losses. And at times it can make you lose your mind in a moment of indecision. For example, all of a sudden, you may do something which you may regret later. Okay. Again, Ketu in the 8th gives a deep affinity for the occult, for astrology, and for all the esoteric sciences that are associated with life and death. Such a person will have a good understanding of life, will have a good understanding of death as well, and would be usually not having a very good relationship with his or her in-laws, because Ketu is a separative planet, and in the 8th house, it can separate you violently from your in-laws. Okay. Again, as I said, I'm doing a series on Rahu and Ketu every Wednesday and Tuesday. So if you want to know more about Ketu in the house, please tune in to that series. The videos are shared every Tuesday and Wednesday at 8 p.m. Indian Standard Time. So that's it from me in this video. Do let me know if it resonated with you. Do leave behind your comments in the feedback section. And I'll see you soon in yet another video. Also, if you want a consultation regarding a chart, please reach out at the number provided in the description box. Namaste. Om Gurave Namaha.